Black metal is a style of extreme metal that I would say out of all of the infinite amount that's ever so growing of subgenres you can think of within metal, it's always been my personal favorite. There's two key reasons as to why that is. The obvious one being just the music itself. There is so much out there with so many different variations of it that the versatility seems endless in a sense. That I could go on this never-ending odyssey of discovery for black metal music and always come out finding something I would enjoy. The second reason is honestly everything that has to do outside of its music, from its scene, history, and musicians affiliated with it, some being quite abnormal with their backstories and add this layer of mystique that, in retrospect, I felt as if I got this second layer of entertainment just learning about it or having conversations with other individuals interested with it. Those two reasons meet on a head-on collision with the discussion in this video, that being about Grausamkeit. For those who are unaware, Grausamkeit is a one-man black metal project from Saarland, Germany that formed in the year 1994. It's composed by Andreas Bettinger, or how most people know of him, that being his stage name BSOD, which stands for Black Son of Darkness. He was born August 1st, 1980. Which means he started Grausamkeit at the age of 14 years old. While already impressive to be a teenager starting your own music project, his love for music stretches back even further. According to Andreas, for an interview that he did for a zine called Behest back in 2013, which I'll be citing this interview a lot as it's really the only thing I came across for Grausamkeit related interviews, is that he stated as an early age, as back as when he was a child around the age of either 8 or 10 years old, he always had fascination with music and learned to play piano around that same time. He also stated that he had a strong preference for classical music with the usage of keyboards and piano because it brought forth more of the attributes of melancholy, given this balance between the feeling of pride while also being majestic. Shortly after, Andres would find interest with hard rock and heavy metal music, such as Billy Idol's Whiplash to Metallica's Master of Puppets. That would lead him down the rabbit hole where he would discover black metal and death metal thanks to the Rock Hard magazine when they did an issue all about those styles of music. Outside of Grausamkeit, Andreas has been a part of, like 20 to 30 projects, some I'll be talking about later on in this video, but what's often cited to him by one of the first ever bands or projects that he was active with was called Blasphema, which only had a handful of demos, and there's not much to state about it other than it's just raw, noisy, lo-fi black metal, where he was showing more of an interest with bands like Mystifier and Beherit, more particularly because of how aggressive yet raw and primitive they sound. He started having fascination with that approach within the style of music. That approach was also apparent on another band that he was a part of during the same time called Musical Ars Decomposition, that only did one split release back in the mid-90s, and this is again in the style of now not so much black metal but more of the approach of noisecore and grindcore, again very fast and abrasive music. Along with being in another black metal band called Dethroned from between the years of 95 to 1999, all these projects and bands that he was active with, by the way, he was either being the drummer or adding in backing vocals. And I guess it's also worth mentioning that according to the Metal Archives, he was a part of another project called Anal Oral, where he did the guitar, drum, and vocals for it, and it states that he started doing it in the year 1992, putting him only at the age of 12 apparently. I couldn't find any information about it online. There was nothing posted on Discogs, so it might have been a project that he started that never came to light. But just, again, interesting to know that during this time he was just active with so much stuff. But what makes Grausamkeit his standout project is a multitude of reasons. At face value, you can tell that he actually stuck with it. I think that mainly has to do with the fact that it's just him alone with Grausamkeit. It's a one-man project as opposed to everything else that he was a part of during this time as he was in a band, showcasing that he's way better off with his own musical endeavors alone. The second reason ties with the first reason. Since he was a lot more active with it, it's a lot more prolific. Compared to everything else that he was a part of that I have talked about, haven't talked about, and will talk about later on in this video, where Grausamkeit has somewhere upwards to like 40 releases as I'm recording this right now in the discography. I mean, hell, from 95 to 97, he did 13 demos, where everything else that he was a part of, whether it be a one-man project to other bands, he would be active with it for maybe a year or two, only releasing at most 3 demos. The third and biggest reason is that Grausamkeit is easily the most unique sounding out of anything that Andreas Bettinger would be a part of, because musically it's a lot more unique compared to the more traditional sense in black metal. You see, everything prior and after that Andreas would be a part of, it's either within the cliches of black metal, it being raw and lo-fi, and other projects that were very fast and abrasive. And what's funny is all those attributes you can apply to Grausamkeit, but the real standout feature that people seem to be mesmerized by is how he implements keyboards. Regardless of what demo, split, full length, or release you listen to within the discography of Grausamkeit, is that yeah, it's raw, harsh, necro-fueled black metal. That is apparent no matter what. But how he implements keyboards here is really reminiscent to something you almost find in Dungeon Synth, how it's layered and played out. And I feel like this is the combination now where we get his fascination with the harsher, faster music of black metal meets his fondness of classical music that he was finding interest with because it gave off the aura of melancholy, again, of that prideful yet majestic sound. All of that is being blended together here. Basically, you can hear that approach on all of the demos that were released throughout the 90s. Some noticeable ones that always stood out to me would be Angel Destruction, Christ Paganism, Under the Abyss, Stardust, which I know is the fan personal favorite, and that's a great release as well, along with Pink Green 666, which I know is a weird name, but in terms of the instrumentations with the keyboards, it's easily one of the standouts. All of the demos that you can hear during this time period usually clock in around 20 or so-ish minutes. So even though they're demos, they feel a little bit more like EPs anyway. And again, a lot of them are kind of composed the same exact way, as when it comes to the black metal portions, it's not really done in the sense of there's riffs, there's melodies, you're gonna head bop to it. Not really. I mean, if anything, it kind of gives off more of the impression of noisecore in certain aspects with the black metal, because it's just played either extremely fast that the guitar riffs sound more just like power tools and vibrations, if anything. Percussions are just gonna blast through everything that really becomes like a noisy mess. But what makes them stand out, as most people point out, is yeah, the keyboards. It adds melody, it adds structure, and when you get through all of that necro chaos and tornado of carnage, to hear these keys and piano sections that give off a very strong, melancholic, classical sense, you get this weird juxtaposition of something both hideous and beautiful being played simultaneously. One way I could describe the instrumentation to someone of Grausamkeit is that it sounds like really harsh, aggressive dungeon synth, is one way of putting it. Regardless though, because of this really unorthodox approach that it does, I do feel like it's a huge reason as to why so many people view Grausamkeit as this anomaly within black metal musically. While all the demos and releases have that approach, if you truly want the best of the best within the discography of Grausamkeit, then you would know of the compilation called Satan's Addiction and Pure Madness, a vinyl compilation that's been in my wish list for years. But honestly, if you want the most primitive, creative, wild, zany, and energetic black metal with this approach that Grausamkeit does, you'll hear the best of it on this comp. While the music of Grausamkeit is something to behold, I really do feel like what's given it the most amount of attention would have to be the backstory and mystique surrounding it. I mean, I'll be honest here, I discovered Grausamkeit probably 7 or 8 years ago, not mostly because of the conversation of the music, but more so having to do with the fact that people would talk about this project, that the individual behind it, BSOD, was this heroin addict lunatic who had 147 criminal offenses against him on his police record, making black metal music, was how I discovered it. And just that backstory alone, just that introduction alone, I could not help but investigate what this project was all about. Because of that, you'll notice one of the standout characteristics of the backstory of Grausamkeit with BSOD is that it states that he's an advocate user for heroin, which, when you notice the, criminal charges against him again of 147 charges, him being an advocate user for heroin, him in interviews describing heroin as this demon, and him being so addicted to it even at the earliest age of 15, this is where I start wondering, like, what is real? Like, him actually having these criminal charges against him. What's him being almost a troll in a sense? Because seriously, you're an advocate user for heroin. That's a weird way to state that you are addicted to something really deadly. And what's him just being like mentally unstable in a sense, I guess is one way of putting it. That whenever I look into the story of BSOD with Andreas, I guess for this sense, I can't help but feel like I'm witnessing the black metal version of like Seth Putnam. Now, he stated that he's been addicted to heroin since a teenager, around the age of 15. Basically around the time when Grausamkeit started. But I would state that it really kicked into high gear with the substance abuse around the late 90s and early 2000s. The reason I say that is because in the year 1999, he started up another project simply titled, and it's really blunt, Heroin Makes Happy. Although nowhere as prolific as Grausamkeit, I would say Heroin Makes Happy is the second most looked at project by BSOD, mainly because, again, of the project's title being so incredibly blunt and it playing within the mystique and backstory of his drug addiction. In terms of music, it's a bit different compared to everything else that BSOD would do, as, yeah, it still has the harsh, raspy, primitive vocals that you would get from Grausamkeit and everything else that he would do. What is different is instrumentally, it's way more rooted in electronic music, resembling more of the qualities that you would get in like darkwave. It's a project that is definitely not for everyone because it combines styles of music that you usually don't come across, and it sides way more on electronic than black metal, so it might be off-putting. But if you've ever wondered what harsh, raw, primitive vocals of black metal mixed with like lo-fi, very poorly produced darkwave would sound like, here's your answer. Heroin Makes Happy is also quite significant because one of the first ever releases it did would be a split with Blood Best Females. This is significant because this is a one-woman project done by Sandra Bettinger, which would later on be BSOD's wife. Stylistically, this project is very similar to that to Grausamkeit, mainly having to do with the fact that most of the releases were ghost-written by BSOD. Again, blending black metal, synth, ambience, dungeon synth together. That's more of like a slower, somewhat version of Grausamkeit, so obviously if you enjoyed Grausamkeit, definitely check this out. Even though Blood Bessemels was really short-lived, only active between the years of 1999 to 2000, Andreas and Sandra were really active with it because in that short time period they released 2 demos and 2 splits, and I believe their last split that they did together was called More Evil Than All, which has a picture of them two oddly in this really wholesome looking couple photo, which when it comes to raw black metal, dungeon synth, and this lo-fi type of stuff, that's like the last word I would use to describe it. So that's just significant here because I really do feel like they were in a very loving relationship to be able to take a photo like this. Although I'm assuming that they were in a loving relationship. Regardless, it doesn't change the fact that both of them were heroin addicts. And you can get a glimpse of it on one of the releases by Heroin Makes Happy called Heroin Is My Queen, which people speculate that the cover photo of this release is Sandra ODing on that substance. During the turn of the millennia into the 2000s, Grausamkeit would still showcase activity, releasing a handful of splits and finally doing some full-length albums. But this would also be the time the project would hit a massive roadblock. That reason being, as I've talked about a handful of times in this video, Andreas Bettinger would get in trouble with the law. So much so that he would end up going to prison multiple times that I need to bring up my phone just to tell you guys all about it. So it started in winter of 2003 to autumn of 2004, then winter 2004 to autumn 2005, summer 2006, all the way up until 2012. And then from there he went to jail again in 2014 of September to 2015. And again in late 2016 up until March 20th of 2019. It's safe to say that a majority of the reason as to why he was sentenced to prison has to do with the fact that he has 147 criminal charges against him, 145 of them being drug related. The other two offenses is one that has to do with violence and the other one has to do with the incitement of hatred, aka hate speech. If I had to take a wild guess as to why he has a charge of hate speech on his criminal record, it more than likely has to do with the fact that out of like the bajillion project that he's a part of, a few of them kind of lean into the lyrical themes of NSBM, which, considering that Germany is so regulated with its hate speech laws, kind of fits into play there. From my understanding of that interview I brought up way earlier on in this video, is that when it comes to the politics of Andreas Bettinger, is he states that he isn't a Nazi. He stated it numerous times. He doesn't endorse it. He has no pro-Nazi views. However, he has interest with some of its music with NSBM, and that he uses the imagery more as like shock value for like anti-society type of thing, is what he stated. Which I know you're kind of like playing around with fire at that point, especially in Germany out of all countries. But again, as I stated earlier, this is where I feel like he's kind of like this version of this black metal Seth Putnam in a sense, because both of them utilize, you know, this very lowbrow, tongue-in-cheek types of themes or imagery to shock someone, or like in this trolling type of way. So I feel like he's doing it in the same spirit as Seth Putnam, which again, I know it's playing around with fire, but I could never see anyone who's truly believing in such radical views to be this degenerate as a person. So again, I think it's just really cheap shock value there. During that time period of the early 2000s up into the late 2010s, there would be quite a handful of releases of Grausamkeit material, but mostly done either in compilations or splits, and they were quite scattered. Sadly to say, during that time period in 2013, his wife, Sandrea Bettinger, would pass away from drug overdose. She was only 34 years old. Since his last time spent in prison was in 2019, it's been rumored that he has gone to rehab, which is quite believable considering the fact that I feel like at this point, if he continued on with his drug addiction, he wouldn't be around anymore. Since his time spent out of prison, Grausamkeit is still active today, although in this decade of the 2020s, it's more silent than previous decades, as they've only done, I believe, 4 releases, half of them being compilations. It's also heavily rumored that Grausamkeit is working on new material, quite possibly a full length is in the work real soon, and you can keep up with it to a certain extent on social media, at least with their Facebook page. The biggest surprise to me, however, is that when it comes to the legacy of Grausamkeit, it's a lot larger than I was expecting. And surprisingly, I would state at this point, Grausamkeit is more popular than ever before for reasons I never would have guessed. I say it's surprising because I remember talking about Grausamkeit a few times here on my channel. I think, God, to this day, I kind of like laugh a little bit at the title and what it's all about. My most viewed video would be the black metal lore video, which I know the internet has kind of made fun of me for a little bit, which rightfully so. It's kind of geeky to a certain extent. But I remember I put BSOD Grausamkeit at the very bottom of that, thinking like he's this obscure, esoteric figure that only the diehards know of it, just for how outlandish and just insane of an individual he is. Well, looking back on it now, I don't know if I would put him at the very bottom of that iceberg, because he kind of seems to be a bit more known, as apparently in other social media such as TikTok, it's really blown up the traffic that Grausamkeit gets now. Because to my disbelief, searching up Grausamkeit here on YouTube, is that some of his releases, in terms of the views and listens that it gets just from this platform alone, there's one that's up to 1.8 million hits. Never in a million years where I think something like Grausamkeit would even get a fraction of that traffic with the music that he's released. But his legacy doesn't stop there with just, more traffic with his releases, but he's also been quite influential within music, especially when it comes to the style known as Keller synth, where his approach was blending dungeon synth, like classical ambient music, with his approach of raw and extremely harsh black metal. There's a branch off of it now called Keller synth, which is basically dungeon synth, but it's more upbeat, it's a bit more lo-fi with its approach, and it has more of like these pulsating percussions with it that people draw a lot of connections that Grausamkeit is kind of like this harbinger to this approach within dungeon synth. And of course, he influenced a lot of black metal groups that are newer, such as Old Nick, Keys to the Astral Gates, and the Mystic Doors, which is a mouthful to say. I had to look at my computer screen to remember it. But I remember when they were releasing demos, there was a lot of comparisons between the two. And I would even state to a certain extent, whether they realize it or not, he influenced this group called Poison Ruin, who are signed to Relapse Records, who blend these forms of punk rock and kind of like death rock with synth that eerily sounds similar to the combination of what Grausamkeit does, only just instead of black metal, it's punk music. Overall, I've always viewed Grausamkeit and BSOD as this just enigma within black metal when it comes to the more of the degenerate and lo-fi side of it. There is a certain charm with it that obviously it's not for everyone, and I know in some aspects now, considering all the attention that it's gotten, it's kind of got like this love-hate relationship within the fan base, as some people tend to admire it for its unorthodox, weird yet unique approach for black metal, and others hate it because thanks to social media, it's blown it out of proportion. Regardless though, I still stand by that it's just such an enigma within black metal, and it's things like this that always keep me intrigued with black metal for years to come. And that'll do it for this video, guys. Really curious to know what you think of BSOD, Grausamkeit, and everything affiliated with them down in the comments below. Like always, links will be provided to everything I talked about in the description. And make sure, like always, guys, you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated, and have a great day.